Hello and welcome to The Bleed, the place between realities within the DC universe. Through The Bleed, we can venture into other worlds and realities that are different from the main DC continuity. Today on our first episode of Into the Bleed, we are heading to the reality I think many will be familiar with, the New 52. The beginning of a new universe, one that drastically changed many of its inhabitants in the wake of the Flashpoint. One person who was changed quite a bit, but maybe not in the ways you think, is Superman.
So let's take a dive into Action Comics issue 3 by Grant Morrison, Rags Morales, Rick Bryant, and Gene Ha. Picking up from last week, issue 3 takes a break from the present day and Clark's storyline and heads to the past as on the planet Krypton, Lara Lorvan attends a party with her mother and sister Zora in Kandor, talking about the various Science Guild related problems with Jor-El butting heads with the other guild members over his core instability findings. Morrison leans heavy into the classic sci-fi world building here. We get mention of band casts and thoughties. Playing Kryptonian culture uses telepathy and signals beamed right into their mind to get information and even entertainment to and from each other. I have very few issues with the New 52 Krypton. Again, like a lot of things, it's more so after Morrison leaves the book and other writers come in and try and retcon or add their own sort of flair to it. But I really like this stuff and it helps sell it as a proper alien culture. It's not just, oh, these are humans but in Ida clothing. These actually feel like alien beings. Lara talks with Zora about Jor-El's research being proven right, but Zora doesn't think that he's right about the end of the world. Suddenly, Jor-El contacts her through the teleband, the telepathic technology all Kryptonians use, warning her to take Kal-El and leave Kandor immediately. Both Jor and Lara have wildly different designs from what at the time was the norm, which was the kind of all-white Marlon Brando Superman movie robes, stuff we saw like that in Last Sun and Secret Origin, both admittedly written by Jeff Johns around the same time. Rags Morales and Gene Ha's designs here move completely away from it and into, as I said before, it's much more alien looking. You get these long regal robes with all these weird intricate headbands and things sort of hovering around them. It looks really cool. Jor-El, however, does have that classic green with the planet on his chest, a staple of his costume for many years, ever since some of the first issues of Superman in Action Comics. But here, much like most of the New 52, it's rather busy and overly designed, with these huge shoulder logos and lights all over it, and it's just a bit too much like a lot of things in the New 52. It was all over designed with speed lines and the Jim Lee armor lines that you'd see rampant throughout this era. Speaking of redesigns, Krypto also briefly appears, and because the New 52 was going for a more edgy look, he's a giant dire wolf dog, something I never really liked. I never really liked this New 52 Krypto. That being said, Krypto doesn't really appear all that much. He comes back in a couple of more issues, and it kind of makes me feel like that was a editorial mandate for Morrison. That was one of the few notes he maybe got, where it's we need to include Krypto and he needs to be, edgy or something. So he just drew him as this big dog and kind of not put him in the story all that much until a little later on in a couple issues time. Jor-El reveals an alien consciousness was allowed into the Teleband network thanks to Professor Vanda, who then killed himself when Jor went to give him his cosmology award. Lara tries to tell her sister and the others that they must leave, but they don't believe her, thinking it's more of just Jor-El's ranting. It's too late though, as the planet is attacked by Brainiac, who actually isn't called Brainiac yet. We don't actually get a name for him yet, but having read beforehand and knowing what Brainiac's design looks like, you can kind of guess, it's Brainiac who's doing this attack. The being tells Jor-El that Kandor would be collected in order to protect it from Krypton's impending destruction, and Jor-El, as the foremost scientific mind on the planet, would be the herald of this news to the people. Brainiac's relationship with Krypton has always been something I'm really particular about. I'm not a really big fan of Brainiac being part of Krypton or he was designed by Jor-El or someone in the Science Guild, much like how he is in the animated series and some various other formerly canon roles that he's had. So I kind of like that he is much more of an entity devoid from a connection between Krypton and himself. He's just a Coluan who likes collecting things. I think that makes him a bit more terrifying as well. He's like an unknown. There's this unknown, mysterious alien entity that invades the worlds. And like here, I really like what they do here, what Morrison does here. Morrison does this thing where they make them an alien entity that's come from seemingly, the deep recesses of space. They were let in almost like a vampire sort of thing, where they have to be invited in. And once they invited in, they begin taking over everything and infecting everything and bottling up cities. It's a damn cool opening for Brainiac, and it hints at something much larger at scale here, which we get to in a couple more issues. Soon, a ship appears in Krypton's atmosphere, announcing that the planet's database has been copied, and so destruction can commence. As robots called Terminauts collect important artifacts for preservation, Kandor is cut from the surface of Krypton, and Lara narrowly escapes using a flyer to get her and Kal-El to safety, while her mother and sisters are trapped within the city, seemingly killed by one of the Terminauts. This is one of the more violent depictions of Kandor's bottling, and I really like how much it sells Brainiac as the otherworldly godlike force that catches the planet off guard. Usually, you get to see the city shrunk down and there's like the big hole in the ground, and I like here it's much more violent. We get this great double page spread from Rags showing the part of the city being like consumed by this big green orb. The Krypton design as well, like the design for the buildings is great too. Again, more alien than what we usually see, than crystals that grow out of the ground or something like that. Is all these cool floating structures just make it look very weird. Back in the present, Clark awakens from his dream about what happened on Krypton decades ago to Mrs. Nixley banging on his door. At the same time, his phone rings with Jimmy on the other end, but he quickly hangs up as he realizes Nixie isn't alone and she has the cops with her. The cop, Inspector Blake, bursts into Clark's room with some CSIs who begin rummaging through Clark's apartment, going through his sock drawers and even his bed. Morrison sets this up as not being the first time the cops have been in here, and Clark is kind of like used to it. He's a bit frustrated that the cops aren't actually out there catching actual criminals, not, as he puts it, people who cross the street on a green light or post about the truth like he's been doing. Blake issues Clark a warning that media mogul Glenn Morgan is more powerful than Clark realizes, and that Clark's apparent agenda at the Daily Star is going to get him into trouble, as will his various articles touting Superman as a hero. Clark's staying kind of locked in and serious here, where he could have easily fallen into kind of buffoonery to hide his true self, is so good. He's standing up for not just himself, but the search for truth that he's been doing with his articles and exposing Glenn Morgan for the man he really is. He's trying to make sure the crooks get put in their place by the police, whose job it is to do that. The officers finish their search, admitting that though Clark is very much a weirdo, they found nothing incriminating. After they left, Mrs. Nixley reveals to Clark that she found his Superman cape and hid it from them. I went back and looked at like what she was doing in the background of all of this, and you can actually see her like find it in the bag and like kind of reach down and like kind of hide it from the police, which I think is really damn cool, as she's kind of protecting Superman's identity. And I kind of like that as well. It kind of feeds into Clark being established as a champion of the oppressed again. Nixley is a blue collar type of woman. She's a landlord, trying to, scrape by, and Superman has been trying to help people like her, so it makes sense for her to be on his side and help hide who Clark is. Also, without really spoiling it, she's going to have a big reveal in a couple of issues, her true intentions with Clark and everything, that will make it all clear. But until then, I'm not going to spoil what that exactly is, but I think it'll click for a lot of people why she actually hid his identity. Later on, Clark and Jimmy have lunch in a diner and watch a news report on which Glenn Morgan expresses his belief that Superman is an alien and a danger to society, as evidenced when he was accosted by the caped being. Clark is a little frustrated that the media is portraying Superman as an alien invader, being people have seen what he's done for the city, but Jimmy replies that Glenn Morgan owns the TV stations and is using Superman to divert attention away from himself and his multiple crimes he's being accused of. Kind of amazing how reading these issues just after seeing the new Superman movie, you can kind of clearly see story beats were lifted not just from, Morrison's other work like All-Star, like they've been touting with that movie, but also here as well. This idea of the news running stories and spinning stories that Clark is an alien invader there to, take their women and kill everyone else and repopulate Krypton and everything like that. Like, that's all here, and I think it's really damn cool to see even, this early New 52 stuff is affecting the movies nowadays. Sure, Superman being vilified as an alien has been done before this, but this is the closest in modern comics it's been done, so I think it's fair to say Gunn probably saw some of this stuff in the comics and thought, oh, that's pretty neat, I'll put some of that in my film. As the news report ends, Jimmy gives Clark the heads up that Perry is sending Lois to offer him an escape route, courtesy of the Daily Planet, effectively offering Clark a job there. Clark knows that he can't do it since he owes the editor at the Daily Star, Mr. Taylor, and they are the ones who actually took him seriously with his writing. He also knows the Daily Planet is owned by Glenn Morgan, and this could be some sort of way to silence him, put Clark under his thumb. There's a bunch of neat little bits through Clark and Jimmy's talk here that I think Morrison really excels at, and that is building up these big shifts in status quo. So like here we see not just people reacting to Superman and his existence, but also learning that he may be an alien, something they didn't know up until now. It's a great little shift from the more grounded champion of the oppressed Superman into straight sci-fi Superman, and as Jimmy says to Clark, the world's changing fast and getting weirder, and even this book is going to get a little bit weirder. Later, Clark works on his laptop in a park, and a homeless woman approaches him, claiming that she can see the ghost of a white dog watching over him. Rags gives us a really cool visual on this page that I actually did not notice until reading this through for this review, and it's obviously a nod to Krypto, who, while not spoiling too much about what's going to happen in a couple of issues, he did survive Krypton's destruction, and in a really cool way as well. Which we'll get to, but the idea is that he's looking over Superman, or like watching over him, and here we get to see a little bit of Rags signposting that visually, where on the bench behind Clark is a bit of graffiti that just says growl, and I like that. I took that as like, oh, that's Krypton growling at this woman. I thought, oh, that's a neat little bit of visual storytelling that I never noticed or never remember noticing the first time I read this issue. Later, as the news continues to report on what Superman has done in Metropolis, including leaving people homeless, something Lex was actually behind but has pinned on Superman, Clark takes a call from his informant called Icarus, who lets him know that he needs to keep pushing Glenn Morgan because he's close to a tipping point. Icarus claims that Glenn Morgan set up the bullet train crash in order to kill Angus the Gun Grunding, along with anyone else who would tell the truth about him. Glenn Morgan is also using the supposed accident to replace the current subway system with his own robotic subway renovation, which will be made from shoddy parts and cheap labor while also netting him a fat paycheck. The voice directs Clark to the factory of tomorrow if he wants to uncover the truth. Morrison does a good job balancing the man and Superman stories of Clark, so at least so far in these first couple of issues. His reporter identity doesn't get thrust to the wayside as many writers usually do in favor of writing Superman, and if anything here, he's using it more than ever, as Superman has barely appeared in these first couple of issues. It's all been solely about Clark trying to bring down this Glenn Morgan guy, and he's trying to do it in a way that doesn't really involve Superman. He's tried Superman and it didn't particularly work, so he's trying to use his writing to get the truth out. It's something I think a lot of people probably would have grown bored with. Obviously people want to read an Action Comics book to see Superman, fight things and everything, and he does, but I do appreciate Morrison for actually thinking about the Clark persona as well. And also, he's trying to take down a wealthy billionaire, so yeah, go for it. I'm all for it. Clark gets to work as Superman again, saving not just a cat from a tree, but its young owner from being hit by a truck. The girl and the cat are, however, scared of Superman as a mob begins to form around him, throwing bricks and bottles at the hero. It all becomes too much for Clark and he gives up being the hero, throwing out his shirt and boots while apologizing to a picture of his parents. I'd completely forgotten we ended up getting a moment here where Clark stops his mission since he feels rejected and frustrated, and I kind of feel it feels like so out of place, like it happens so quickly, and after really what is considered like one incident, he saves a child and their cat and then immediately is like attacked by a mob, and that's what makes him kind of give up. It kind of feels like a little too less, and I'm really surprised Morrison actually did this, because usually they are so good at like that build up of events compounding into something big at the end. I'd also completely forgotten about Martin Parr Kent in this universe. So for those who don't know, Martin Parr Kent are actually dead in this universe. They were killed in a car accident. Something we'd actually learn a lot later was actually thanks to Dr. Manhattan, which, if you didn't know that, that's gonna happen eventually, and maybe we'll get to that in this show, we'll see. Personally, I did not like the Ma and Pa Kent thing, and retroactively, it was made because of Dr. Manhattan fucking with the universe. That's not how it was when the New 52 begun. It was just something that was, oh, this is different than what we had before, so let's do that. I don't think it particularly worked for Superman, since it really alienated him, especially in these early runs, pun intended, from a lot of the things we usually see of Superman, and it's one of the things that really made me dislike a lot of the New 52 Superman stuff, because it didn't have those parents give him those lessons, and at times it often made him come off like a man baby, and an emotionally stunted man baby, and we'll get to that sort of stuff later on. Days after quitting being Superman, Clark gets an interview with Mr. Tide, a supervisor at the Factory of Tomorrow, who was recently put in charge of the robotic subway renovation project. Clark begins leading the conversation to expose the Tide's lack of concern over the fact that the robots will just make manual laborers redundant, resulting in even more massive layoffs, which means more destitute people in the city. Tide is pretty angry at Clark and his investigative questions, being that he thought this interview was just going to be a puff piece about what's happening, frustrated with all of the reporters hanging around the factory as of late. As it turns out, Lois and Jimmy are also in the factory, chasing down the exact same lead Clark is, but Tide decides to give them all the boot, having them all removed from the premises. As I said before, I really love the reporter side of Superman getting its time to shine and actually push the story forward more so than the superheroics are doing. It's an interesting way that Morrison is using Superman as more of a force that reacts to the things around him more so than the thing actually being part of those things, or the thing that causes that reaction. He's just part of the story, and that will change as the story goes on. It helps sell the alienation Clark feels even more now that even the people that know Superman is a literal alien, so that's made him feel more of a freak and more detached from all of these people. Before Tide can kick the reporters out, the robots in the factory all come alive thanks to the mysterious alien intelligence that attacked Krypton decades ago, infiltrating them. The robots are contorted and transformed into Terminauts, the same robots Brainiac used on Krypton, as he announces that Earth's database has been copied and the planet will soon be destroyed, just as he did on Krypton. Across town in the Steel Soldier project, John Corbin is being outfitted with the Steel Soldier armor under the supervision of Luthor and General Lane. While the armor is fitted and comes online, Brainiac begins to take over the armor, infesting its circuitry. So I'd completely forgotten that Brainiac and Metallo are tied together early in the New 52, and it made me real excited for what's coming. It's also a really terrifying new take on Metallo, as Morrison and Rax portray the takeover as just this sudden change that happens in his mind. The doctors all are sent into a panic because they find John's heart just burst and his eyes are being burned up by the energy inside of them. It's, all this horrifying stuff that's happened to this man who is, for all intents and purposes, now dead. Upon hearing from the possessed Metallo that they are the voice of the Collector of Worlds, Lex eagerly pipes up, reminding the being of their bargain that they made together, but all the possessed Metallo wants to know is, where is Superman, as Lex has promised him the Kryptonian. Action Comics issue 3 contained a lot more surprises than I actually remember from when I first read it back in 2011, especially when it came to the cliffhanger ending with Metallo being quote-unquote born. I also love the focus on Clark and his journalism more so than his Superman antics. Morrison using Superman as more of a force in the world with everything moving around him than being actively involved in everything is so interesting, and it spotlights the character's alien heritage really well, making that a focal point of these early stories and how people are reacting to them. Stuff we see even nowadays is still being referenced in the most recent movie. Tell me in the comments section what you enjoyed about this issue, and join me next week as we witness the debut of the New 52 Steel.